So let's take a look at some of the important settings. There's about 50 total, and we're going to talk about a dozen. So one of the important ones is the audio project setting. This is basically where you choose your sample rate and your bit rate. Also, you can choose the specific file type that Avid saves your media as when you're importing or capturing from tape. You can save it as WAV, AIFFC, or PCM. I personally like AIFFC, so that will be my choice. Also, of course, whether it's 16 or 24 bit and whether it's 48 or usually 48 or 44.1. Bin settings. This is where you save how often your project is saved and how many versions of a specific bin are saved, so that if you have, unfortunately, some kind of a crash, or if you just realize, oh my gosh, I deleted that sequence, I need to go back and find a version of it where the sequence still exists, then you can set those settings of how often the stuff's saved right here. You can also, for example, enable Super Bin, which I'll explain a little bit later on. This is a great feature for saving screen real estate, and also enable Edit from Bin, which you're going to want to have turned on as a Final Cut Pro user. That'll definitely be one you'll want to have turned on. Composer settings. This is basically how your edit system edits, so this is very important. This allows you to set how many rows of timecode information that you can see at the top of the screen up here. It allows you to choose center duration, which I like to have on. That shows you your in to out point here. It also allows you to choose how many rows of buttons you have underneath your source and record window. For a new user, I would definitely say 2. For someone that's more experienced with the interface, I'd definitely say 1. There are also choices for phantom marks, which I like to have turned on, and various other things throughout. You'll definitely want to look at the documentation and figure out how you want some of these things set. Here's one that you're going to love. It's the email settings, and you're thinking, it's an editor. What is it doing with the email setting? Well, believe it or not, the Media Composer can email you when it's finished with a render, which I think is spectacular. You can have it email your phone, your cell phone, your smartphone, let it know, hey, your render's done, get back here, get back to work. So that's a great option, and this is where you set all of your, obviously, SMTP server and passwords and usernames. Export settings, we're going to cover this a little bit more thoroughly later on when we talk about finishing up your project, but basically here you can choose all of these factory presets for, say, doing a QuickTime reference export or a regular QuickTime movie export, or if you want to export something, for example, as just a graphic. All of those things are chosen right in here, or export as audio, a specific audio file. All those settings are done here. You can also choose your own settings. So if you want to have a graphic setting, export a single frame of your video as a graphic, you can do that right here in the export settings. All those can be saved and customized and shared with people. General settings. The most important thing under general settings is the default starting time code. Now with Final Cut Pro, the default starting time code is 1 hour. But if you want to have your default starting time code be set differently, you can just type it in. For example, I worked at a place that it was always 58:30:00, so you had a minute for bars and tone and 30 seconds for slate and black. And so we always had 58:30 as our default starting time code. Even if you set the default starting time code, you can still change it per project, but at least that gets you the default. Grid settings is another one of the settings that I kind of wanted to show you. If you want to be able to set up how your safe title looks, you can set safe title, the colors, the color for the boxes, whether you're looking at a square or standard film or Academy. Also the coordinates. For example, if you want to show a 4:3 box inside of a 16:9 monitor, you can set that up right here. Import settings are like your export settings. You're able to set things specifically to import various files, various QuickTime files in specific ways. For example, if you're bringing in a square pixel file or a non-square pixel file, or whether something has been created in RGB color space or 601 color space, all of those settings are chosen right here. You can also choose to convert your sample bit rate here too. Keyboard settings, it's so important that we're going to make it its own video, so definitely check that out because it really will help you understand how to edit with the Avid and how to make your transition from Final Cut to Avid a little easier by modifying the keyboard, but we'll cover that in the next video. Media creation is also very important. This tells you where your media is going to be stored. So if you want to make sure that you don't put it, for example, on your system drive or on the drive that the system launches from, you can make sure that media does not go to those drives. You can choose, for example, what the capture rate is ahead of time. If you want to make sure that in this project, when you default start capturing, that you want to be capturing at 10:1 or 1:1 or whatever you want to be capturing at, or whether you want to make sure that you're at 1:1 10-bit, choose it right now. Apply this to all of these different settings. So now all of these will be 1:1 10-bit. And you can also choose what drive you're going to start. This is kind of like Final Cut Pro scratch disk. That's basically what this is for. It tells you where the media is going and what kind of media it's going to be. Render is also similar. This is kind of like the scratch disk from Final Cut Pro broken up into two pieces. One would be media that's captured and imported, and the other would be media that's rendered. And so again, you can choose how the media is rendered. For example, interpolated fields, both fields, duplicated fields, original preference, and also whether you get a sound every time you render. If you don't want to be bothered every time you finish a render with getting a beep, then you can say no sound. If you want to hear some kind of a sound, then you can choose what that sound is. Timeline settings is another important one. This allows you to show the toolbar, for example, show marked regions, which means that in your timeline, when you mark an in and an out, then the area in between those marked sections is purple. If that's good, then you can do that. There are a bunch of other choices in here to check, including as you're playing through the timeline, do you want the timeline to scroll? Do you want it to page through or not move at all? The Final Cut way is basically to scroll. And that pretty much wraps up our quick overview of the settings list in the settings tab of the project window.